Okay, folks, it's your pro wrestling rant. It's your buddy Mike Messier. I haven't done one of these in a while, and today we're going to discuss why pro wrestling fans hate pro wrestling fans. And I've thought about this one for a while. I really have. And I've just made mental notes, which I'll share with you now. The outline, the overview of my discussion here. First off, we'll be discussing the fantasy that is pro wrestling. And then the three kind of subtopics of why wrestling fans hate each other, the divisions amongst us, basically territories or federations if you prefer, or alliances as far as actual wrestling companies. That's one thing. Age of the fan, fans' age. And third, and probably the most nuanced, is stylistic choices. So let's start with my overview here, my first argument, or my first hypotenuse. Pro wrestling is obviously, it's not a, I don't want to say, it's, I mean, I as an old school fan, it kind of tears me up to say this, but we have people like The Undertaker and everybody else telling their stories. But pro wrestling is kind of a hybrid. It's a hybrid between reality and fiction. It's a hybrid between sports and entertainment. It's a hybrid between work and shoot. And I think in the big picture, it's really a hybrid between reality and fiction. I mean, yes, these are human beings that we're seeing compete or perform as a competition in a ring, whether it's Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat in 1989 or Roman Reigns and Logan Paul in 2023. It's an exhibition of competition, and the swing of whether you're trying to convince the audience that it's like a legitimate fight or not depends on the era, depends on the country. Japan used to do a better job of that convincing. So what's left to the audience, us, basically, now that we've allowed that this is kind of a rigged thing, a predetermined thing, we fill in the gaps with our imagination. And WWE in the last couple of years, maybe more so 4 or 5 years ago, but when they had a lot of story gaps in their television programming, I would notice that people on Facebook and Twitter, they'd always try to fill in the gaps in the storylines. And, wrestling fans have done that. Wrestling fans are very forgiving of their wrestlers, of their wrestling promotions. So you try to fill in these gaps for when things don't make sense, and you make certain allotments, allowances. Pat Patterson winning the Intercontinental title in Rio de Janeiro. We all know now at this point that was a fictional tournament, but when I was a young wrestling fan, I didn't know that right away, that it was a fictional tournament. I thought it was a little bizarre that this tournament took place in Rio de Janeiro instead of Madison Square Garden or Pittsburgh or someplace civilized like that. So we make these allotments, we make these allowances. We're forgiving. However, we're not so forgiving when other fans are forgiving for things that we don't like. I'll give you, for example, on me. 3 or 4 years ago, during the height of the pandemic era, when the WWE was doing all these shows, I think out of the training center, performance center in Orlando, they had a pay-per-view where essentially the Miz got eaten by zombies. I think the Miz and Jim Morrison both got eaten by zombies. It was a cross-promotional thing. I want to say with a Netflix movie or a series, maybe a Walking Dead spinoff or something. But basically, we saw a couple of our top heel wrestlers in the WWE at the time in front of our very eyes get murdered by zombies. And, we're fed this thing. And yes, it has shades to the Revenge of RoboCop from Capital Combat 1990, although none of the Four Horsemen actually got murdered by RoboCop. But my point is, this promotional tie-in, not something that I liked, especially with the Miz and Morrison thing, because essentially we saw the end of these wrestlers and then magically they're back on Raw the following night, type of thing. So I would still point that out. Even now, 3 or 4 years ago, I still reference that Miz got eaten by zombies when I'm basically saying that the Miz is not that great a wrestler, or he doesn't take it seriously, or good for him, he's got the hot wife and the money, but he's still a sellout and he has no moral compass. I would still use that argument. Well, someone else, maybe back in 1990 would say, well, what's Arn Anderson and Ric Flair doing you know, and Barry Windham and Sid Vicious, they're all running around like fools for this, you know, actor in this RoboCop outfit. How can you take this seriously? Why do you care if Sting's going to come back from this knee injury and beat Ric Flair at the Great American Bash 1990? This RoboCop thing throws all the legitimacy in the toilet and flushes it after it shits on it. And, you know, how could I argue that? But as a young fan, obviously, I'm emotionally invested in the Sting Ric Flair storyline, and I'm giving forgiveness. I'm allowing some atrocities, some disgrace with the RoboCop thing. Whereas several years later, I'm an old, crusty veteran wrestling fan, and I'm not giving those allowances. I'm not giving Miz and Morrison the benefit of the doubt. I'm ashamed of them, okay, for basically selling to zombies and looking like complete idiots. I'm no longer approving. And some of that just comes with, I've, as a wrestling fan, seen so much bullshit in my tenure as a wrestling fan, and someone who's done ring announcing, had a job interview for the WWE creative team and so forth, and fancy myself a bit more intelligent than many of the storylines that are presented to me. You know, my allowances have decreased with age and time, okay? So we all kind of have our things we allow for and things we don't. Things we'll put up with and things we won't. And this kind of goes into the rest of my stuff, all right? And basically what I'm getting at, we are co-creators of this wrestling fantasy world we're in. When I was a child, when I was younger, I had this thing called the Superstar Pro Wrestling game. It was basically the Dungeons and Dragons of pro wrestling. You'd have a card for every different wrestler, and then you would roll dice, and then you would have these matches, and it was all happening in the confines of your brain, yet it was quite stimulating and quite fun. And I really mastered this game. I mean, it's not a game that you would really compete. It's just you're having fun creating these fake matches. But I would have this whole world in my fucking head, and I would write down the different champions, and then I started making cards for the wrestlers. I had one friend who also, by chance, had this game, and he would do his game, I would do mine. We started making audio cassettes for each other, like of us playing the goddamn game and listening like a couple of assholes to each other. Do play-by-play on our fucking role-playing game. So this is some nth level shit, okay? So what I'm getting at is, you know, wrestling's the giant escape. It's more so than football, I think, more so than baseball. These things have seasons. A lot of the appeal to the football now, I think, is based on betting. People are more invested in the teams, their fantasy teams with their money, than they are cheering the hometown squad, the players. They get traded so often, and they're free agents so often. The loyalty to the costume, to the uniform is no longer there. The home city, it's not there as much. So people change, okay? And we're not as naive as we used to be. At least we don't think so. Getting back to pro wrestling, what were my three divisions? Okay, the federations. I'm wearing this wonderful ECW shirt that I took this photograph, Sabu and Taz. I took that goddamn photo. So yes, I was a pretty hardcore original ECW fan. I would go to a lot of ECW shows. I mean, I don't want to say I feel #blessed, but I was able to see Barely Legal in person. I was there the night of the New Jack Kulas incident in Revere. I saw Sabu do a lion salt onto a table where his mouth fucking went into the fucking table thing. Okay, so I saw a lot of scary, like Sabu's mouth got all fucked up. Because he basically guillotined himself on a fucking table thing, a fucking leg of a table. So I saw these things with my own two eyes. I was there for the Extreme reunion or Extreme Rising when Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney had their last match. I think it was Axel's last match ever. All right? So I've been through the wars with ECW. I have a loyalty to that. Now, I don't necessarily have a loyalty or a respect to Paul Heyman, okay, because I know things that most of you people don't know, but to guys like Tommy Dreamer and Raven and Shane Douglas, I will always have a certain loyalty, a certain brotherhood, in my own mind at least, with these guys, okay, because I've been through the goddamn wars. People, you know, from old school Texas, you know, a friend of mine actually was able to attend as a young child. He was able to see the Von Erichs in person. I think he saw David Von Erich wrestle in person in Texas. So when this Iron Claw comes out, this movie, yes, I will be doing a review in a day or two once I see it. He has a loyalty to that. I know a lot of friends of mine, you know, the Monty and the Pharaohs, the Benny Scalas, all these guys, Angelo, Mad Dog Angelo Despino, they're all New England guys. Benny Scala, Nikita, Breznikov, Evan Ginsberg, they're all New England guys, okay? And they all, when you talk to a guy like my buddy Steve Feinberg from Rhode Island, and they talk about their wrestling childhood days, they always say the same thing up in Rhode Island. Oh, Jack Ritchie Stadium, Gorilla Monsoon. It's always in the same order. Bruno Sammartino, Chief Jay Strongbow, Gorilla Monsoon, Haystack Calhoun, Pedro Morales. It's almost verbatim. It's always Bruno Sammartino, Gorilla Monsoon, Haystack Calhoun, Chief Jay Strongbow, and I think Pedro Morales is like the five guys that these old school, like late 70s, mid 70s people always list. It's always the same guys. If you talk to, you can see on this channel my interview with John Hitchcock from the Parts Unknown comic book store. He wrote a book about his pro wrestling fan journey. I think it's Section D, Row 1, Section D, talking about all the great wrestlers that he saw in the Mid-Atlantic days and how him and his friends basically started cheering for the Four Horsemen and helped evolve the Four Horsemen, the originals, Ole and Arn, Tully and Rick from Greensboro. So the fans have this great involvement based on the territories is my first point. So if I'm sitting here, where I live, and I'm looking at, say, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla from, I guess, 2012, 2014, and I'm seeing, 10 wrestlers, Jushin Liger and a bunch of other guys of note jamming their thumbs up each other's assholes, I'm thoroughly disgusted. I'm appalled, okay? Because having been to the goddamn Crockett Cup 87, I didn't see 48 wrestlers, 24 tag teams stick their thumbs in each other's ass that night. I saw fucking tag team wrestling. Now these clowns in California want to dance around and stick their thumbs up each other's assholes. Well, I'm offended by that, okay? So Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, I have an immediate disregard and disrespect. And I shared my thoughts on that with the one and only, who was that guy, the professor of wrestling, Chris Hero, okay? And he responded in kind, and the whole Reddit thread started between Chris Hero and myself about the thumb in the ass spot. So I'm greatly offended. Now, he's coming from a different point of view. These are his colleagues. These are his friends. He's wrestled with these clowns. He's going to defend them. Thankfully, he was not part of this shenanigans. But to him, he's got to defend his idiot friends. And, so there you go. So, but for me, it's highly offensive. And that's when we get basically territorial pissings, Nirvana, okay? Smells Like Teen Spirit album. Territorial pissings. I have, in my mind, what is real pro wrestling, Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich, Last Battle of Atlanta. And you have what's in your mind as a true wrestling thing. John Cena versus Randy Orton, 2 belts in a ladder match, or whatever the fuck. Whatever your frame of reference is, Roman Reigns versus Jey Uso, okay, in a Hell in a Cell. Your thing of like, this is what the ultimate wrestling match is. For a while, the great majority of fans would say, oh yes, WrestleMania 17 was the creme de la creme. That was the peak. That was the ultimate show. Triple H versus The Undertaker, Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit, etc. Great show. But yet still people pissed on the main event, how it ended with Steve Austin turning heel. So, even when we agree, there's still things we bitch about. My point is, and I'm territory, and now I'm kind of segueing into fans' age. If you're a fan, like I said, from the late 70s, and you put Bruno on a pedestal, or if you were from Minnesota in the 60s or 70s, you'd probably put Vern Gagne, Nick Bockwinkel on a pedestal. If you're a fan of today, you're putting Roman Reigns on a pedestal, or maybe you're not, or you're putting Cody Rhodes on a pedestal. And to you, these guys are the be-all, end-all. But 10, 15, 20 years ago, other fans had their be-all, end-all, whether it was Sting or Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair or the Road Warriors. And guess what, folks? 15, 20, 25 years from now, when Cody Rhodes is retired, or when Roman Reigns is off to Hollywood, or he's running for political office or whatever the fuck, there's going to be some new people that have come along. And if you don't believe that, where you can really see that evidence is with the women, especially the WWE women. You know, a year ago, Mandy Rose was the big goddamn thing, right? Well, she hasn't wrestled for a year, and here's your Tiffany Stratton, here's your this one, here's your that one, here's all these other beautiful women that can wrestle and do heel work and all this stuff. So everyone's disposable. Another ass will fill your seat, okay? So age. If you talk to a fan today, and this is one thing that I find superior, I feel superior about it. When I was a young fan, I would read this wrestling magazine called Sports Review Wrestling that would chronicle that things that happened that month 10, 5, and 15 years previous. So I'd be reading these magazines, they'd be talking about Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe, or the Great Mosquito, all these wrestlers that maybe I'd never see either then or ever, but I would read about them, and I'd see these photos, and I get this vision in my mind of what wrestling was like before me. And today, it does upset me, and it does disappoint me that the young fans that have all this wonderful access through YouTube and through Blu-ray discs and DVDs and all the streaming apps and all these wonderful things, with a tip of the fingers, even if you're just a WWE fan, you can go to the network or now the Peacock, and you can see all these wonderful matches from the past. You can get the full vision, or at least a partial, spectrum of different things. But I find that a lot of fans, young fans these days, don't put forth the effort. They don't put forth the energy. I'm kind of revolted and disgusted that some fans today that seem to know a lot about the modern stuff, they never gave 3 hours to watch Starrcade 83. They never sat there and watched Ric Flair versus Harley Race in a cage match for 14 minutes and 35 seconds. They don't have that in them. They never sat there, and even if they're a WWE fan, they never watched WrestleMania 1. They don't know what the first match of WrestleMania 1 was. Okay, Tito Santana versus Mr. X. It was Buddy fucking Rose underneath the mask. They never sat there and watched Junkyard Dog and Tito Santana versus Dorian Terry Funk at WrestleMania 2. So these fans, they say that they're fans, but they're basically fans of contemporary what they're being shown on television. I had a good friend of mine, intelligent fellow, several years ago. We were basically killing time around the holidays, and I said, hey, we had time to kill, a friend of mine and I said, hey, buddy, you want to watch, I got the Survivor Series from last year on DVD. You want to watch it? And he was shocked. What do you mean? What do you mean you have the DVD? I'm like, well, I got the DVD of the Survivor Series from a year ago. We put in the, watch it. And he was so confused, basically befuddled, that I would be watching a wrestling show where the results were already known, that I had on disc. Like, it was shocking to him that I would watch something that wasn't live happening that minute. Like, this never occurred to him, that you could, that you could get enjoyment from watching wrestling matches where you already know the result. Maybe you've even seen the goddamn match before. Or just, for just the enjoyment of watching it without having to have that extra layer, which I do enjoy too, of not knowing who wins or it being in live time. Well, to me, that was just foreign, because for me as a young fan, I always enjoyed watching, the best matches a few times over and over. You tape a Clash of Champions and you watch Dr. Death Williams beat the Stallion 3 or 4 times during the week. It would be wonderful. And you wouldn't think about, like, why is this wrong, or am I wasting my life? You know what I mean? But in any regard, it's just different fans have different approaches, which kind of goes back to my first point. We all have our little vacuum. We all have our little vision of what wrestling is supposed to be and how you're supposed to enjoy it. Are you supposed to enjoy it in live time? Can you tape it and watch it later? Do you have to be ignorant of the results to fully get the maximum enjoyment, or can you know the results? We all have our little rules, our little divisions in our mind, and if somebody comes along and fucks with those rules, it upsets us. We get upset. So there's that. What else did I say? The territories, the age, the style. Now here's something where I kind of go off, as you know, the angry wrestling fan, me, Mike Messier, and I'm trying to be less angry, trying to, coming to the end of 2020, 23 or whatever the fuck, trying to be more open-minded to you fucks. But basically, the style, there, a lot of people today will accept, we call it the choreographed or the gymnastics, the men's gymnastics, where, oh my God, they did a Meltzer driver and they did 5 Hurricane Ranas and they did a fucking 619 and they, you know, the flippy dippy shake. I mean, even Jim Ross on his podcast always bitches about the one guy going to the top rope, doing a backflip out of the ring to the floor, and 4 or 5 guys standing around like bowling pins to catch him. I don't like that either. I mean, the first 1,000 times I probably thought it was cool, but now I don't. So the point is, we all have our kind of logistics, but as I get older and more ornery, I mean, I was talking to this nice gentleman from Texas about this on referee Joey's podcast. What if you had a wrestling federation where guys didn't bounce off the ropes? You know, like if you really think about it, one of the greatest tells of pro wrestling being, you know, less than on the surface as a fight is guys getting thrown an Irish whip into the ropes and you magically have to bounce off. You know what I mean? I can't stop it. I mean, if you look it up, I remember seeing Jerry Seinfeld before the Seinfeld show. He did a fucking stand-up bit on David Letterman on the old 1230 NBC show where Jerry Seinfeld tore into pro wrestling and he's like, I can't stop running into the ropes. I have no control over my body. So it's just silly. I mean, if you really look at it, just throwing someone into the ropes, they can't stop their feet, and then they have to bounce off, and then they have to come back, and they have a pretty good idea that they're going to get smashed with a clothesline or a kick to the belly or a belly-to-back suplex or a tilt-a-whirl or a sidewalk slam, and yet they still continue to bounce off the ropes. And I posted this on Facebook once upon a time, not too long ago, and some fans said, well, Mike, you have to say that the person who's getting thrown into the ropes, he's choosing to run off the ropes because he's trying to do his offense, and now it's just a race to see which guy gets their move in first. Okay. So, I mean, this fan is making an excuse and an allotment, a justification for silliness, whereas I, you know, like I said, having been around the goddamn block, I'm a little sick of the fucking Irish whip into the ropes. I'd like to see a wrestling thing. The closest thing I can think of is that World of Sport from, once again, I think the 1970s or 60s in Britain, UK, where I don't think they did a lot of bouncing off the ropes by my memory. I don't think it was a across-the-board thing, but I think that was held to a limit, or maybe that UWFI thing from Japan, that pseudo shoot fighting. So my point is, you know, different styles. I keep going back to the Miz and Morrison getting eaten by zombies, but you could say, well, gee whiz, Mike, there's always been horse shit in wrestling. You know, the Ding Dongs, 1989, it's a wonderful show that they debut on, the Clash of the Champions, I think June of 89, and it's a hell of a show. It was like 100 degrees in that National Guard Armory, I think in North Carolina, Fort Bragg, and they're having this NWA Tag Team Title Tournament, the Freebirds, the Road Warriors, the Dynamic Dudes, all this excitement. Actually, the Road Warriors weren't in that one. They were already eliminated. But the the fucking Freebirds, the Midnight Express, the Dynamic Dudes, the Samoan SWAT team. And in the middle of this show, they have this, I believe it was that Clash. I want to say Clash of the Champions 7. They had the debut of the Ding Dongs. Look, and everybody has shat a brick on the Ding Dongs. I mean, they're right up there with the goddamn Shockmaster as the goofiest gimmicks and so forth. Guess the fuck what? Your buddy here, Mike Messier, I wasn't really offended by the Ding Dongs. I thought it was kind of an interesting gimmick. They were actually 2 very good wrestlers. They were an established tag team on the indie scene. It was a goofy gimmick, but I thought that they did it well. And I thought that as like an annoying heel thing, it kind of reminded me now that I think about it of Jimmy Hart and the Megaphone. Like I actually attended live WWF house shows where Jimmy Hart would be on that goddamn megaphone talking to the Hart Foundation with this whole fucking microphone for a megaphone for hours on end or for minutes on end. So my point is, I thought the Ding Dongs wasn't such a bad idea. But I mean, you know, pro wrestling lore will tell you it's a shit sandwich on rye toast. So my point is, once again, the apology thing, how much are you willing to tolerate? The stylistic thing, look, I have a lot of respect for the Japanese wrestlers, the Japanese style, strong style, so forth. What has always stopped me from being a bigger Japan wrestling fan, quite frankly, is the lack of commentary available. I mean, I don't speak Japanese. I don't understand Japanese. And, you know, when I was in college, we used to have a running joke that we were going to go to Brown University and kidnap a fucking Asian student from Brown and force him to translate the commentary to us while we watched Japanese wrestling matches. You know what I mean? Like, we'd feed him and everything, but we would have this kid, you know, that we would kidnap, and he'd have to tell us what they were saying in the Japanese commentary because we wanted to understand what the hell was going on with the Misawas and the Okanis and the Otanis and the Jushin Ligers and all these wonderful wrestlers. You know, we were upset because we couldn't understand the language. And to me, you know, it wasn't just a good match. I needed to have some type of grounding of a storyline. So, but then funny thing is, when, you know, they started doing things like Jim Ross, I think, used to work for New Japan, and they would have this weekly show on one of these cable stations. I wasn't really watching it. You know, for whatever reason, I think it was Josh Barnett and Jim Ross. I couldn't get into it as much as I would have hoped to. But anyway, the point is we all have our different styles, and I guess I'm kind of dwelling on the comedy thing, but you can fill in the gaps here. I mean, there's different styles of wrestling. You can say, you know, the six-sided ring from TNA. I like the high-flying stuff. I don't like it. I like when people have a more traditional match, whatever that means. You can even split hairs a little bit and say, well, who do you like better, Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels? Well, Shawn Michaels had a more performance-based presentation in his matches, and Bret Hart, I thought, had a more reality-based thing. But if you really put them on the continuum, compared to other wrestlers, you know, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels are not that far apart when you compare them to, say, a mid-'80s Hulk Hogan match or a Lou Thesz match or a Verne Gagne match. Then suddenly Bret and Shawn styles aren't that much apart compared to other people that did well at different times. So now let's get into the hatred a little bit. We have all these divisions, right? And I think what I'm, you know, when my overall, go back to the first point, when my preferences are not your preferences, I might feel threatened. I might feel like, well, if you're not seeing this, if you're not collaborating on this fantasy reality thing, like I'm collaborating on it, then you must be wrong. Now, I can't just say, well, maybe I'm wrong. And I can't say, well, maybe you have your vision of it and I have my vision of it, and that's okay. It's like we have to have, at least we feel that we have to have, an agreement. Like we all agree that this guy's great and this guy sucks. We all agree that this federation's the shits and this one's awesome. And the reality is, you know, we don't have to agree. We do not have to agree. You can say, hey, The Miz is awesome. He can get eaten by zombies 20 times and he's still awesome. I can say that Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat Clash of the Champions 6 is the best match of all time. And you know, whatever you say is wrong. You can say, well, you know, Okada and fucking Omega, their 3 matches are the greatest trilogy of all time. You're wrong, Mike. We can all kind of shit on each other and have our territorial pissings, but the reality is we're all kind of deceiving ourselves. You know, there is no objective. This Mount Rushmore stuff, it always infuriates me. People never think in terms of the real Mount Rushmore. Like, there was certain things with those presidents. This guy is to start the Union. This guy is to preserve it. This guy is to defend it. No one ever puts that into their Mount Rushmore stuff. Nobody thinks, like when they say, oh, the Mount Rushmore of WWF is Steve Austin, The Rock, Hulk Hogan, and The Undertaker. Okay, well, what about Vincent K. McMahon? What about Vincent McMahon Sr.? What about Gorilla Monsoon? You know, what about this asshole or that asshole or the guy that owned Madison Square Garden that rented out the building? Nobody thinks that way. They say the Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, John Cena, and The Undertaker. Okay, what about Gorgeous George, Antonio Inoki, Giant Baba, and George Hackenschmidt? Or Don Leo Jonathan? And that's when you lose people, because they don't study the goddamn history. They don't have respect for the true origins. There's a whole heap of fans that have basically gotten their wrestling information from WWE home video DVDs or Blu-rays or whatever the fucks, or the network. So when you're just basing your opinions on something you saw on a program or a DVD from a company, you're not getting the full picture. Well, that's it, folks. I might have to come back with part 2 of this. This is your buddy Mike Messier, MikeMessier.com, One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan YouTube channel, One Man and the Camera Films, One Mike Messier for my film reviews. I will be seeing the Iron Claw soon. If you like this video, share it, thumbs up it, and buy all my books and things. Mike Messier, the Foreign Object eBay store.